Welcome to today's show, and we are going to cover a topic which, for us in property investment, is quite relevant. And hopefully, if anybody's tuning in, they will agree and kind of find this quite interesting, because we're going to talk about rent controls, which is, especially here in Scotland at the moment, is something that's coming in and will have, an effect on your property investment portfolio. And we're going to explore, whether it's, is it really protection, or is it just added pressure on landlords and investors in Scotland? So the biggest change in Scottish property investment, I think, really in a generation, I could say, for years, Scottish property investors have focused on the usual fundamentals that are involved with buy-to-let investment. Buying well, financing correctly, maintaining their properties, and finding those great tenants. But when we look at today's kind of how the land lies, there's another factor that sits above, right above a lot of anything else, and that is the government intervention into buy-to-let property investment.
I don't think primarily the government understand it. They're just, when they start tinkering with the buy-to-let market, the private rented sector, that they cause a huge amount of problems. And it's not for us, it's for the tenant. It's the tenant that caused the problems too, because the knock-on effect is they cause it to the landlord, and the landlord has to pass it on in some shape or form. If it's an extra cost or an additional service they have to provide, it has to be costed. I mean, that's how business works.
Yeah,
it's a business. And the thing I don't think the government has actually understood yet, they think property is an investment where it's hands off, but it's a business. And I'll give you two examples. A self-managed landlord is classed as an investment in tax and even by the government. Even, I think, Keir Starmer, who was the Prime Minister, said at one point that, well, landlords don't work. And it's like, wait a minute, if you're self-managing, when the argument then is, then what does a letting agent do then? Because the letting agent does what the landlord does, what a self-managed landlord does. They do exactly the same thing. They don't do anything additional. They do what the self-managed landlord does. So therefore, if you're saying a letting agent is a business, then surely the landlord self-managing is a business as well.
Of course it is.
But they don't understand that. They don't get it. They just want to intervene with everything. And I think it's it's driven by a party which I would say is a party of envy, and it's the Greens. It's just like there's obviously, most of the people in the Greens, I don't know what's happened to them in the past, but they're obviously got an axe to grind with landlords for some reason, and it's like this is an opportunity to get back at them at all costs. I mean, even if I went to them and says every single one of my rents on average is and on average my rents are about 30% below inflation or where they should be, they would still think I'm up to something. Well, what are you up to then? And it's like, okay, giving them lower rents, affordability. Well, why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's like, and they would still be skeptical of that. Why are you doing that? You must be up to something. And it's like, no, we're not up to anything at all.
And the thing with
that's the point.
and you mentioned there about these things like rent controls, things are going to have a direct effect on the tenant. And the irony is they bring this legislation in on the premise that it's going to help the tenant. And it doesn't.
No, it's like there's no joined up thinking, and it's a lot to do with the majority of MSPs, I would say, are academics. It's the first thing I did as soon as somebody was appointed the housing minister the other night. I looked at their background and went, "You've got no formal background in housing." And then I looked at the deputy first minister, and then I go, "You've got no formal background in running a parliament and actually being accountable for an economy." Yeah. It's like they've got nothing, and it's like, who's running this? And I'll tell you who's running it. It's the civil servants. And that's just like putting an accountant in charge.
And letting them
It's like
appoint
an accountant will just think purely about what is the cost savings and what is they just don't think. But even worse, I don't even think they would think about what is the cost savings. I would think more at like, we just need to keep spending money on helping people. That's the objective, to help people, keep spending money. Yeah. But as Margaret Thatcher said, and a lot of people will get upset by me quoting Margaret Thatcher, but socialism is great until other people's money runs out.
Yeah, I would agree.
There comes a point where it's just like you've run out of money. You're now going to have to cut your cloth to suit. And at that point, they've probably grown in these sectors that big that they're now not able to cut back anymore because it's entrenched into that culture. They have to run like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like anything. It's like if you've got 10 people doing something and you say, okay, we've got to cut costs, you can't just get rid of 2 people and think it'll do it itself still. I mean, if that's the case, then you've obviously got 2 people doing nothing for all that time.
If it could run with 8 and you've already got 10, then
and that's the mentality of today's government. That's what it comes down to. Let's move on though, because it's like whether you agree with rent controls or not, it's become one of the biggest influences in future property investment in Scotland, particularly in the private rented sector. Yeah. Today's discussion, I would say, isn't political, but I'll try to stay away from it as much as possible.
It's hard not to involve.
Honestly, because it is the politicians that are dabbling in this, and I would say dabbling. They're thinking in 1 dimension or even 2 dimension at the very most. They don't think in 3 and 4 dimensions about, if I do that here, how will it affect everything else and cascade down there? It's like they don't think like that. It's like they've got a couple of bits of the jigsaw, but they don't understand the full jigsaw when it's put together and how it should work. It's like having a couple of cogs in a gearbox, but you're not able to go any faster because it's only cogs you've got. You've not actually interlinked them properly in order to make it work more efficient. That is what the government's like just now.
Yeah.
And some would argue that's what most governments are like. Again, it's no political. Of course it is. Let's just be honest about this. This is definitely political. But it's understanding for investors out there. And that's why we put it as part of the Wealth Creation Show, as timeless content. We want it to be like this because you might have that, you might see this in 10 years time, you might see some sound bites and things like that and think to yourself, okay, what was the background behind that? Why was that? And that's why I'm explaining it right now. It's about understanding how these changes could affect your investment decisions, your cash flow, your portfolio growth, and ultimately your financial future.
Yeah.
Because successful investors don't react. They adapt before everyone else does. They get it.
Yeah.
Some people watch it happen. Some people make it happen. And some people just wonder what the heck just happened.
Yeah, they missed that.
And I would say the really successful investors make it happen. And they realize that they can't change 75% of the stuff because it's outside of their realm of change. It just happens. And they have to look at it and forecast and think, if that changes in the future, or if that is that likely that's going to change, what is the probability that's going to change, and be able to adapt to that when it comes. And if it does come. If it doesn't come, well, hey, bonus. Because more than likely, whatever's coming is going to cost more money and more resource. So if it doesn't come, thank goodness for that, we've done it right. But the downside of that for the tenant is we've had to increase rents on the premise that might be happening, and we'll have to store and stockpile cash for that reason. That's the mentality of it. And we don't make these rules. That's what you've got to do, in the premise that actually might happen. Here's a classic example: EPC ratings.
Yeah,
we've still not got to the bottom of it. They still keep pushing back the deadline. But the amount of landlords having to put money aside just in case the EPC changes, because they're going to have to upgrade their properties, and they'll be left high and dry if they don't do that. And then that means they're going to have to put the rent up in order for that. If they just came clean and says, look, the EPCs are fine, we'll just leave it as it is and do your best.
Yeah,
that's what they should be doing. And that would then allay the fear of a landlord. Therefore, what would happen next out of that is landlords wouldn't need to put the rents up all the time, and the tenant wouldn't be affected as a result.
I mean, it's true. I mean, look, we've done some of your renovations and can just doing that a wee bit extra so we could get it to a C, so we don't have to worry. So yeah, definitely. But we're talking about rent controls today, and there is a lot of legislation and things changing. But rent controls is something that I think a lot of people are unsure about. So what are rent controls is the question probably a lot of people still ask. And there's often a lot of
I'm still asking that as well.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of confusion.
Because they're no controlling rent at all, are they, really?
No.
Because they're because in a nutshell, and you'll explain what they are now. Let me just say, in a nutshell, do they really work? So let's talk about this. Tell us, Richard, what it is, and then I'll say what I'm about to say.
Okay, so yeah, there is a lot of confusion, and many people believe that the rent controls. It's going to be every property in Scotland will suddenly have a fixed rent forever.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't how the legislation's going to be designed to work. So the proposed system allows designated areas to become rent control areas, where there's restrictions on rent increases, and that could apply, and they can apply if local authorities demonstrate there is a significant pressure of housing affordability in a certain area.
Yeah.
Okay, and the objection of that is to improve, and ultimately this is what they've rolled out, to improve affordability, provide greater certainty for the tenants so they know what the rent is, reducing rapid rent inflation in a certain area, and then creating more stable communities as an ultimate result.
Yeah.
Now, from an investor's perspective, this change it changes really one important principle, and it's really historically rents follow supply and demand. And we see that. So under rent controls, regulations begin to really influence the pricing alongside the market forces as well. So you've got you've got the both of this. So, and then that doesn't automatically mean that property investment is bad, but it certainly changes how an investor will assess opportunities in the future if a rent control is in place in an area.
Yeah, absolute bonkers. Right. Let me just cover that because we have covered the objectives. These are the facts. Objectives include improving affordability.
Yep.
No, it doesn't. Because newsflash, landlords like me never used to increase their rents when a tenant moved in. We didn't see the need to do it. Somebody asked me the other day actually, and I went, well, because I don't see the need to increase it anymore. Why would I? Well, you'll make more money. It's like, well, how much do I need?
The numbers still work, yeah.
It's like the tenant's all right, and tenant's fine. Tenant was there all the time, so why would I want to push it even more? But because of that, it's actually going against them because it's like, well, I'm going to have to put it up on the premise that if rent controls do come in, then I've not got anywhere to go if inflation goes up or if anything else changes. So I'm just going to have to do it until I get more clarity about what actually happens. See how fear drives this market. It'll provide greater certainty for tenants. No, it doesn't. Because I can guarantee you, I could take a poll of all these tenants out there right now and say, "Are you certain about the future of your tenancy?" And I bet the majority the majority will not say yes.
No, they won't feel completely secure in where they are or how.
So it's not giving tenants any greater security. It's probably giving them worse security because of the fear from the tenants and the landlords as a result of an incoherent strategy for rent controls.
Yeah.
It'll reduce rapid rent inflation. Absolute lies. It doesn't reduce rapid rent inflation because look what's happened. 70,000 single unit landlords have left the private rented sector, and they're the ones that used to charge the least.
Yeah, they were the low rent ones. Yeah,
because they weren't bothered. They just had one unit, so they didn't have really a huge cost to cover. And if they did have something to do, they would just be able to do it out of their own pocket. And it was just like, oh, for the future, if it increases in value, then I'll get the benefit from my retirement. So 70,000 of these single unit landlords have left the market since 2019. They have not reduced the stock, though. They've transferred them into corporate owners. So people like me, bigger landlords who go, okay, I'm in business.
Yeah.
I am not a hobby. See what happens there?
Yeah.
So rents have to go up because I have to provide a service because I'm more professional at it. And I have to pay people the going rate rather than getting homers done. That's what the difference
Yeah.
with single unit landlords was. Homers, where people could do it less, therefore the landlord didn't need to recoup enough more money yet. And that's what's done it as well. It's not reducing rapid rent inflation, it's actually increasing it. And it's encouraging landlords who never increased the rent before when a tenant moves in to actually increase the rents because they have to, because of this.
Yeah,
it will create more stable communities. Absolute bullshit. It does not create stable communities at all, rent controls. It makes it worse as more landlords begin to exit.
It's just got it because ultimately it's displacing people. Yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk about the elephant in the room. The people that would charge the highest rents and are charging the highest rents are the big, huge, massive build-to-rent landlords who are actually excluded from rent controls.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't include them.
You couldn't make that up, could you? What a stupid policy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but we want more houses to bring down the rent. No, you're not going to bring down the rents. They built them for a certain cost. They have to recoup that cost. It's a brand new property and it's been built to net zero standards. Therefore, and they're part of a corporate of dividends and shareholders and all the rest of it who have to get paid a return on investment. Not wait for the capital to go up. They have to get out the income. And the only way you get out the income is you have to increase the rents to get out the income. Whereas single unit landlords used to wait on the capital appreciating, then they would sell the property one out of 250,000. Would that make a dent on the market? No. Imagine if a corporate landlord has to sell 600 to 1,000 units.
Yes.
That is a worry that you wouldn't want to have. But that's what they're doing. So this, the objectives, yes, these are the facts, Richard. You've actually said them. That's what the objectives are. But they won't achieve them with rent controls and putting.
In reality, it's not going to work out like that. No.
Yeah, it's. You know what it reminds me? It reminds me of the poll tax.
Okay.
The poll tax was a community charge, dreamt up by a Scotsman, believe it or not. And he decided in his wisdom and said to the government, this makes sense that everybody uses all the same resources, so everybody should pay towards the use of those resources.
Poll tax is the original council tax.
Yes, and that then, the resources, that then sounds good because everybody's paying. Whether you own a house or not, you're paying because you use the toilet in the street, you're dropping your litter and somebody has to sweep it up. And so everybody was to pay their share. And in theory, that sounds great. But in practice, how you implement that was impossible because the people couldn't be found. There was no way of getting them. And therefore, the masses actually were encouraged to go against it. And this is exactly what's happened here. It's in theory, it sounds right. Yeah, that'll do it. But in practice, it does not work. It won't work. And you won't get it to work. All you'll do is make things worse.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you say about the, these 70 or 77,000, these landlords, these single unit landlords, things that have all sold up, they're out. So the majority you're leaving these big investors with bigger portfolios. But for them, then it becomes, they need to think about the cash flow. And that's when the cash flow becomes so important for them to run it as a business. Because investors, when they're buying property, they're looking at the rental income and they need that to naturally rise over time. But what happens is you've got the continual rise in costs as well. And if you've got a rent control, the rent can't go any further, but the costs do.
Yeah, rest my case. That's what happened. It's like, why would you want to take the risk if you're a single unit landlord to do that? Or even have two properties? Why would you want to take that risk? Even if you had 4 or 5 properties, why would you want to take that risk? If it's really draconian towards these single unit landlords and that, because that's what it is. They're not. Who wants to take on a property and has to comply with all that legislation and then do all these things? It's like, wait a minute, I've got a full-time job already. I work 35 to 40 hours a week, and I get paid 25 and above. With this property, I'm lucky if I'm making $1.5 grand in profit a year.
Yeah.
Why would I want to comply with this legislation? Spend all that time then for $1.5 grand a year? Really? Of course not. And for the other people that go serviced accommodation, somebody mentioned the other day, it's like, oh, it was in a newspaper, the I paper or something like that, says, oh, this person made one change and it made another £2,000 a month for them. And it's like, the change was they became a serviced accommodation provider and they do all their own laundry and all their own changeovers. I mean, okay, so you just traded passive income where you don't really need to get involved and a letting agent does it for you, for a full-time job.
For another job, yeah.
Does that not defeat the purpose?
It does, yeah.
The point of property investment was actually to try and minimise the impact it has on you as a person and not actually pick up a full-time job from it. That's why they're leaving. The increase in insurances. I've got my insurance coming up, so I've no doubt I'm going to get an increase in that. Maintenance across contractors are absolute fortune now, and they're now to the point where the VAT threshold hasn't been moved up. So the VAT threshold hasn't been moved up, but the cost of doing business has moved up. Therefore, they're now VATable. Therefore, landlords have to take a hit at 20% more on their costs for maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think we're going to get that from?
The tenant.
Rent. We'll have to do it. So inadvertently, let me just say this, inadvertently, the government is collecting tax from the tenant via the landlord. And it's called VAT on maintenance. Because the contractors, the single employed contractors are now going into VAT threshold now. They're having to charge 20%, and the landlord's having to put the rent up. Therefore, the tenant is inadvertently, indirectly paying VAT to the government. So it's a tax on the tenant, rent controls.
Yeah, and that's what they don't get when they're implementing these things for the tenant's benefit, and ultimately they want to suffer. Yeah.
And then safety regulations. We've got to have even more safety. When has anybody had any problems with Legionella in a private rented property?
There's been one case of Legionella, and I don't think it was in a private rented in Scotland in the last.
It's a local authority one.
It was a local.
And every single landlord has to pay to get a Legionella test, and yet there's been no instances ever. That's mental. It's the same way. I mean, I'll be honest. It's the gas safe regulation is a necessity. I've got to say.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But how many have actually anything happened in a private rented property? It's always been local authority.
Yeah, and I think it's the same with electrical. I mean, electrical, fair enough to do a safety check, but the extent that you have to go to now to pass an EICR is...
It's like all the owner occupiers are still sitting with their fuse boards with the wire in between.
The
amount of houses I go round to still, and they've got that.
Mm-hmm.
So a landlord has to do that for a tenant, but an owner occupier doesn't.
Yeah.
That just makes no sense at all. So there's a disparity there between all these different things. So they're putting more and more costs on the landlords. Management costs increase because now regulation and legislation comes into play. So therefore, a letting agent has to do more work. And you can't just expect a letting agent to say, "Oh, that's fine. I'm getting a management fee every month." Well, what were they doing before then if that was the case?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
They must have been doing nothing then if you're expecting them to absorb all this cost into it.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't. So they'll have to put the costs up for rent, for the letting. They'll have to charge for inspections. They'll have to charge for out-of-hours stuff. They'll have to charge for all these different things if you're wanting your management fee to stay the same. They'll have to probably put management fees up, to be honest, and they'll have to put minimum management fees in for some properties because maybe the rent's only £450 and they're at 10%. It's £45 a month. Really? By the time you process that, by the time your accountancy department collect that rent and puts it through the process system, because it's their labour as well, and then you send all that out on your computerised system that you've had to pay for as well, your £45's been spent. You may as well just give the landlord the property.
And that's just collecting and processing.
Tell you what, I'll pay you £20 a month to self-manage it. That's almost at that level, That's what people do not understand. The cost of doing business has accelerated immensely for a letting agent over the last 10 years because of legislative requirements for the government and what they're doing, and also for all the tradesmen as well that they interact with, and insurance companies, because of claims and everything that go up as well for the smallest things. So these are all and yet the rental income has to be restricted. What? So I could go to the bank then and say, I tell you what, Mr. Bank, I've decided I'm just going to pay a certain amount every month for my mortgage, and you're not going to charge me any more. And I think it's got to be that interest rate. I think not your 6%. No, it's got to be 4%. Because I'm getting told I could put my rents up 4% only. So therefore, I'm only wanting 4%. What do you think the bank will say?
No chance.
I think the second word's going to be off.
Yeah.
I think the expression is go forth and multiply.
Yeah.
That's what the bank would say. It's like, oh, we'll just call it in now. Do you mean we'll just start evicting the tenant? See that, how it affects the tenant? So they can't afford to do that. Then for the property gets repossessed, therefore the tenant gets evicted. And if you're repossessing, the tenant gets evicted quicker. You don't have to wait all that time. There's a preference for the bank system. That's mental, eh?
Yeah.
That's absolutely crazy. This creates what investors called margin compression. Now, I've just explained to most people, you're making about maybe $1,500, $2,000 out of property a year on some flats and stuff like that. That's all you're making. You're not making a huge amount. You're getting appreciation, but you're not getting that because it's appreciation. You only get it when you sell it. And who wants to evict a tenant just to get the appreciation to pocket it? No one. No, if it's necessary, if it's unnecessary. So that's the problem. Margin compression happens, and as the gap between income and the expenses becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So it comes to a point where you just go, to hell with it. I'll be better with my money in the bank. I can get an ISA or something like that. It'll give me 4%. I can get bonds, maybe government bonds, gilts, something like that. It'll maybe give 4.5%, 5%.
Yeah, because I mean, as that gap between just gets smaller and smaller, it makes it so much more difficult to find property that is actually a viable investment. Do you know? I mean, it's not to say that you can't find them, but a lot of people maybe can't be bothered to do so much work to find something that's viable, and when there was plenty out there originally. But because of this like you see, this marginal compression on what you're having to outlay compared to what you're getting back, it just isn't worth it.
Yeah, that's why when it comes to buying, that's why when it comes to buying property as an investor, you know the price that you buy it is more important than ever, because you have to be able to work out if you can weather a storm if it comes along because of this. Because if this happens and that happens, and you're restricted and you have a void, or you can't do this or you can't do that, or the tenant doesn't pay, you've got to factor all this in now. There's so much risk, because if a tenant doesn't pay, you've got a year before you get them out with no rent. Could you last without a year? You can't. It's about £10,000 and up. That's mental to think that should be okay. But for some reason, it's the only industry where if you have to continue legally to supply a product, even though the person's no paying for it, you can't take it back. So the person doesn't pay for it, they don't pay rent, and you still have to supply it to them, and you even still have to do the repairs. Sorry,
I know, it's crazy.
I don't know any other business that does that. So future investors can't rely solely on rent increases to rescue poor purchasing decisions. That's the key here.
So then what about
property values?
Yeah, so I mean, what will it do to property values? I mean, is that maybe something that's maybe not discussed enough? Because if we're looking at, property investment potential in a property, if the rental becomes restricted on a property, what then happens to its investment value? Because if you're a buy-to-let investor, you're looking at a property, and the opportunity of that property is based on the future income from the rental.
Yeah, I could tell you straight away what's going to happen. If you put a rental restriction, and it's so minimal, the rent that you could increase, and it becomes a restriction, it becomes more or less what it used to be like. I think it was 1988 and before, they had tied houses where you had restricted rents, and it was done. It was all done before. In 1988 and before. So there was an act that came in, it restricted all the rents, and therefore it was like for lifetime. And that's how you had all these places like James River Mills and Tillis Russell and all that. They had lifetime tenants. They could only put up the rent a certain amount, like 2% a year. Even though the costs were astronomical, they could only do that. And they couldn't get them out because they had lifetime tenancies. That's what they dictated under these rent. So therefore, when they went to the open market to sell them with the sitting tenant, they went for half the price. Half the market value. Sometimes even less.
That's crazy.
James River, when they went up for sale, I actually put a bid in, and they were market value was 130 each, and I bid 60 grand for each.
And they were considering it at that level.
That was the level they were at, because they had tenants in it, and it was tied into this legislation. They'd done rent controls from all these years ago and put lifetime tenancies in people, where they could actually have that rent and just only have a 2% increase every year, if that, for the rest of their life. That's mental. Inflation goes 10%, and they can only charge 2%. And that's what could happen to investment values. If you get an area like that, and then a landlord says, okay, another thing as well, the landlord just says, okay, I'll evict the tenant, then I'm going to sell. Therefore, we've got one less stock again. Imagine if 70,000 did that, and they did.
Yeah, and every time
remember, the open market will always pay a lot more. Vacant possession always gets you a lot more for a property than with a tenant.
Yeah.
It's unlike commercial, where you've got a commercial tenant, it's locked in for 5, 10, 20 years on a lease. Therefore, and you've got up all the time built into it, so you could put the rent up every 5 years. It's got an up in the rent, and you can review it every 5 years. So, and that's what then appreciates the value of that property. Just like HMOs, if you've got an HMO in something, it's worth a lot more than just as it is as a normal house. Because it's an HMO, that's like it's a definite thing that you know what you can earn out of it. Therefore, that pushes the price up. But with a property like this, if you've got a rent control, that's not pushing the price up. That's actually restricting it. Therefore, the value will go down. So you wouldn't want to sell to another landlord, because therefore you wouldn't get as much as you would get on the open market because of the rent restriction. And that's what happens when you do that. Some investors will become even more cautious, and demand for investors would actually soften in certain locations because of the rent control itself.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, areas with strong demand, limited housing supply, high unemployment, may continue to perform well regardless because of that, because limited housing supply.
But then that would mean those locations become, even more valuable then.
Well, look at the key here as well. How are you going to put a rent control in an area if the local housing allowance is actually more than the rent control itself?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. Yeah,
work that one out, because it's the UK legislation, the local housing allowance, and rent controls is only a Scottish thing. So therefore, if rent controls were put in, and you could put somebody in with local housing allowance, but you could put it up to local housing allowance, So why would that be a problem? Why would you not be allowed to put that up if that was the local housing allowance rate for the area? Because the legislation says it. That's lunacy. That's two competing legislations actually against each other.
Yeah,
they contradict, definitely. And so that's the sort of thing that people do not understand what's going on and understand the full picture. The politicians especially. Not every town, not every postcode, not every street will perform the same, though. Investors may need to become far more selective in terms of what they're doing. For that reason, yourself, the first thing I've done with my portfolio is what happens if everybody lost their job and got local housing allowance? Where would that sit me? Is there a risk I need to mitigate? No, because my rents are a reasonable rate. Therefore, I don't need to take huge calculated, huge mass risks. Therefore, the portfolio remains stable, and therefore the tenants have that enjoyment of having their home, and I don't need to charge them full amount to do that, and that's fine with me.
See, that's interesting. I know obviously how you you buy and how you work your investments and how you look at the numbers and how you do risk analysis and things, Jim. But it does bring us, yeah, and I know which one you're doing that for. But it brings us to the question. We've already kind of touched on it. Will investors and things start to leave Scotland? And it's probably one of the biggest questions that will get asked around legislation like this and the rent controls. And some landlords have already sold. Some have kind of stepped back for buying, but then others, like yourself, continue to buy confidently. So why is that? I think we kind of just answered it there about the risk analysis and looking at and the bigger picture and the numbers and things.
Yeah, you've got to remember I've been in this for 30 years, so I've seen it come and go. So it's the experience that I've got and the wisdom that I've acquired over all these years, and understanding how it works. The markets will always change, tax will always change, interest rates, licensing, even regulations, and now the rent controls. So I kind of foresaw this coming anyway. So it wasn't the end of the world, and I had factored it in. If it comes to it, then if it comes to it, I could self-manage.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. If you factor in, you're using a letting agent now, that's fine, and all the rest of it. And that's what it's meant to be for. If you are working something else or you're overwhelmed somewhere else, then go and do that, and that's fine. Use your letting agent to do that. But then at some point in the future, if you find that the numbers are changing, the rents are restricting, the costs are going up, and you're thinking, I can't afford to have the letting agent anymore, well, put yourself in a position then, if you've built a big enough portfolio, where you could take over the portfolio and just self-manage again. And therefore, you don't need to worry.
You've always got that fallback then.
It's a great opportunity, especially when maybe a recession comes along.
Yeah.
Because then if you lose your job out of no fault of your own because they've had to downsize, then you've got something else at the sideline that you could just pick up and work it. And it's the cost that the letting agent would charge, then you could absorb that and have that for yourself and just self-manage from then on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's another way of mitigating your risk. That's what people do not realise. They're convinced that they've got to always use the letting agent. I'm a big fan of both, letting agent, self-managing, or a bit of hybrid and working in both. But I'm a more of a fan of, if you can make 50 quid over here per hour, and it's going to cost the letting agent, like, I don't know, 10 quid an hour, because the letting agent would use maybe 4 or 5 hours in the month on your property at most. So to 15 quid an hour, 60 quid letting agent fee a month, or maybe 120 quid, whatever. But if you're making a hell of a lot over here and you're paying somebody that, then you'd be better just letting them keep doing that, because that's tax deductible, and your salary isn't. Your salary comes in as a result of that. So you'd be better just making that money, because you're making a lot more than you're paying a letting agent with the hours that you've got. So why self-manage? That defeats the purpose completely. That means somebody's investing in the property market that actually doesn't understand the dynamics of investing and the principles behind it. They've just got on board with the crowd. They don't understand what they're actually doing, but they're just running with the crowd. A bit like crypto.
Yeah. Yeah, the hype. But it's true. When you've, like you say, Jim, you've done it for so many years, you expect there's going to be changes. You plan for it, and then you simply just shift your your strategy or what you're doing at that time to fit into that time and that space, rather than panicking and selling up like a lot of people have done.
It's the easy option to do, but you've got to understand it's the headache that comes with it. So is it really worth it for 2 or 3 properties?
It might be the right choice for people.
I mean, I'm not putting my money in the bank. Yeah, I may as well just put my money in the bank and be done with the hassle. Be done with the and I've heard most landlords say they actually don't tell people they're landlords or they invest in property, because they're fearful that they'll get called all the different names of the day.
Backlash.
Yeah, they're fearful they'll get a backlash. And I'm like, really? Wow. As far as I'm concerned, I put a roof over everybody's head. It can't really afford to have a roof over their head. And the government's not doing that for them. And I'm doing that. So what else? What is the other person that's trying to criticise me doing? Nothing. Hee-haw.
Yeah. But it's amazing how society could flip that perspective on a landlord.
So it depends. Two sides see it completely different, the same scenario, and somewhere in the middle is the truth about what happens. That's really what it comes down to. So over time, you'd probably be just focus on better quality property, stronger yields in areas, higher specification homes, maybe. Lower maintenance portfolios, that's maybe another one you want to continue. Longer investment horizons. But the key is here that the investors who succeed usually adapt faster than everyone else.
Yeah.
What's the opportunities most people miss then?
So a lot of people do overlook things, and you know, every regulation creates the winners and it creates losers as well. And while some investors become quite fearful, like we just spoke about, and others really they build like that quality portfolio and really immerse themselves in, like you said,
on the streets.
And like you say, they start to upgrade and do things. Yeah.
As soon as somebody becomes fearful, I see opportunity there straight away, because they want to exit. They want to exit sometimes at any cost. If I make it easy for them, I'll get the upswing of that, and I'll capitalize on that. And that's just the way of the world.
And not everybody's got that mindset. And the very few that have got that mindset far outweigh the people that are fearful and exit. And then that brings, you know, there's fewer investors buying, and then it reduces the competition. And then, you know, that means the motivated sellers then increase. And then it just really gives you that a lot more negotiating power, and improves your position as an investor in your purchasing position.
Definitely, I think so. That's the case. It definitely improves that overall.
Yeah, like the long-term investors like yourself, Jim, and other people that have been in it a long time, they recognise that uncertainty creates that opportunity. I mean, like you say it all the time, safe as houses, but properties survive. You know, recessions, banking crises, the high inflation that we've seen in recent years, rising interest rates, all these, you know, tax reforms and all these regulatory changes.
When you talk about recessions, I mean, when the crash of 2008 came along, it's my property actually got me through it.
Yeah, that's right. It's one thing that saved you.
Yeah, I wasn't getting an income out of my business. Like it was, the market had just stopped completely, and everybody stopped buying houses, and everybody stopped renting houses, or using a letting agent. They'd all come back, so that caused a huge problem. But I was able to then rely on my investment income, and that got me through it. And then when the banking crisis as well, that was a classic. So loan to value was really low. So therefore, I wasn't one that was in line for the bank to go, our exposure's too high with you. We need to sell all your portfolio, which it did for quite a lot of people I knew. It also has, you know, we know when inflation goes, property prices tend to go up as well. Also, when you inject money into the economy and you borrow, like the government did in COVID, I actually did in the credit crunch. They injected money in there and bailed the banks out. That money had to go somewhere. So what happens is that then creates inflationary pressure, but it also creates inflation in terms of the property as well. So that's, you know, these are all things that happen. Rising interest rates, well, all you need to do is fix for 5-year fixed rate deals.
Yeah, and wait till it comes.
Generally, by the time if you're doing it right, by the time you've got to the 5th year, you've built a bit of cash. You might be able to pay down the mortgages a bit, or you've improved the stock over these years, because you're not spending the money every single month. By the way, that's no the point in property investment. The property investment is to do medium to long term wealth building. It is not to sit day to day and live off that money. You need to put money aside in order for that to grow. That's why the single unit landlords have left, because it's like, well, there's no money anymore, I'm off. And that's the problem. So when these sort of things happen and you have rising interest rates later on, even after the 5 years, you know you can weather a storm, but also possibly the property's moved up in value a bit, therefore your loan to value is a bit less, therefore you get a better rate. So instead of having the 75% loan to value in 5 years, you've got a 65% loan to value, and the banks like that, and they can actually give you a better rate as a result of that, because you've built that in there. So that, because you've improved the property as well. I mean, I've done my numbers now, and I've improved my property, and yeah, it's actually looking pretty good. I mean, one of the properties I bought for 75 is now 125. But we just spent 25 grand actually doing it up at Queen Margaret.
Looks good though.
Yeah, so it's mint inside, but that's the value, and you could use to borrow against if you want.
And leverage, use that to leverage.
Or it gives you leverage to get better rates as well from the bank because there's less risk involved. Property survive regulatory changes as well, and the question becomes: are today's changes permanent barriers, or simply another adjustment successful investors will learn to navigate? And I think it's just an adjustment. I've learned to navigate already.
Yeah,
I know exactly what to do and exactly how to do it. I understand the system completely and how it works. History suggests markets adapt, investors adapt. The best opportunities often appear when confidence is at its lowest.
yeah,
That's it. It is Warren Buffett's classic, what he says: when people are fearful, or when people are greedy, be fearful.
yeah.
But when people are fearful, be greedy.
Yeah,
Because that's when you get it. That's when the opportunities appear as a result of that. So that's what I've learned the most things out of what Buffett says and what other people way more successful than me have said. And that's where you learn from daily all the time. This is an education process, more of a just sit and do nothing. It's the classic example between two doctors. Good one. Two doctors. Because I remember walking into a doctor and saying one day, it's like, what do you do for continuous education? He went, nothing.
So he doesn't adapt his skill.
Yeah. So what do you do for to learn about the new nutrition and all the rest of it and what actually works now? Nothing. What? And yet you go to another doctor and they go, no, holistic, all the rest of it, no, this is what, and all the rest of it. And you notice one doctor's really successful because they've adapted and they've actually understood and they've learned and they've got more facts and more information now, whereas the other one's still out of date.
About current things, yeah.
Yeah, and they're still practicing the same thing as they practiced like witch doctor like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So this is the same with investors. This is why some investors make it really big and some investors just never get there. Both have got the same enthusiasm, but one just doesn't understand what to do with it.
It's about applying yourself and having the right mindset.
Yeah, support. Definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, all these changes and things happen all the time. So possibly people might be watching and thinking, well, how should I as an investor respond then?
Panic!
Well, I think the answer is not to panic, but that's what everybody does.
Yeah.
Initially, for the most part, that's what people
I always
do.
get that impression, the meme, it's like Macaulay Culkin running up and down the corridors and Home Alone. That's what I always see in my head when I see panic now.
Yeah, I mean, not to panic and not to really ignore what's happening, because a lot of people, there'll be so much changes and it maybe feel overwhelmed and they'll do the ostrich thing and just stick their head in the sand and think, oh, go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all about becoming a better investor, and that's, like you say, Jim, knowing what your numbers are and what they actually mean, stress testing all your purchases, allowing for lower rental growth assumptions. Don't just assume, stick to the facts and the numbers, and keep quite large contingencies in reserves to mitigate issues that will ultimately arise as part of a buy-to-let portfolio. And you were saying about obviously your upgrades to your property at the moment, and you've done quite a lot recently, focusing on the quality assets and how that can benefit you then, obviously, when you've got that higher end property, because, well, you're using it now to leverage yourself.
Thinking long term rather than the month to month is obviously key here. And
Yeah.
most importantly, remember why you invested in property in the first place. That's what keeps you going. Why you invested in property.
People lose sight of that.
Yeah, I do think. I think they forget. They forget what started them off in the first. It's kind of like when you go for marriage counselling.
Yeah.
They go way back to the very beginning. They go, well, see, when you first started to getting together, what was it like? And then they build what that feeling was like.
Remember why they got together in the first place. Yeah.
And you could kind of then work out for there. That's exactly what you should do with your investing before you actually make any fundamental major decisions, because it will be a major decision to sell. And you're affecting a tenant, remember, especially if they're not. If they're not in it and it's vacant, then fair enough. You can sell if you want. But if you decide that, look, I'm just selling now, I've had enough. It's like, go back to the feeling that you had when you first invested and what you invested it for. And if you're starting out right now, write it down and keep it with you, because that's what will keep you going. That's what kept me going. I always remembered that, and I still got it emblazoned into my mind why I'm doing this, for that very reason. So you've got to remember, it's the old adage, isn't it? You're either pushed by your circumstances or you're pulled by your dreams. If you're neither, you'll never do anything. You'll just coast, and that's all right for some people. But pushed by your circumstances, pulled by your dreams, and that's the most important thing. Wealth through property has never been created by chasing headlines. Don't get caught up in the hype. Understand your numbers. Don't go to, these property gurus or furus, the fake gurus, and then they all hype it up and go, oh, I did this deal, I did this. What about Jeanette over there? And what about Susan? And what did she do? And no, come on, get up here. Mary, get up here and say something. You see my age, the names I'm saying. Tell by my age, I didn't give what the new names are. Tony, get up here and get on the thing. But they're plucking one person out of thousands of people that haven't really made it, and they're trying to hold it out as if everybody can do that. And I'll be honest, not everybody can do that. It's a combination of their circumstances, a bit of luck at that time, that they were able to do that. Yeah. But they try to give you the impression that you're going to be millionaires within 2 or 3 years. You're not. You're going to you'll maybe have a lot of property, but you'll certainly not be a millionaire, because it'll all be borrowed on someone else's money or the bank's money.
Yeah, and that's what they're pitching this. This fast-paced. It'll happen overnight or over a couple of years, and it's not really. It's created through having that patience and making these good decisions and educated decisions, and having that long-term thinking.
Yeah,
it's not something that's going to happen in 12 and 18 months or something ridiculous like that. And like you says, Jim, as well, always having that thought process to think about changes to come and try and adapt and think about them before they actually happen or before everybody else. Because if you get caught up at the same time as everybody else, then it's maybe too late.
Yeah, definitely. Rent controls will definitely change the way how we invest, and they don't necessarily change why property remains the most powerful wealth building asset available. That's all it comes down to, really. It's
just another thing that you're going to have to think about.
Let's crack on and do the closing thoughts. What's your, because we've only got 5 minutes and we're done.
Yeah. Well, I think it's clear when we look back over the years and the history of, the economy in general, but property investment, every generation of investors and things, they face their own challenges, whether it's, recessions, inflation and all the rest of it. And
people think it's just them, eh? It's just that, poor me. It's like, this has all happened before. I've seen it all before.
Yeah, so as I say, some have been, high interest rates, and some in history have been through the recessions. The most recent was 2008, and all these tax reforms that have come over the years. But today's investors are facing increasing changes in regulations, and the question isn't whether the change is coming. It's already here. The real question is, will rent controls change your investment strategy, or will you simply just refine it so that it works around them?
It's refined. It's refined. Most people, some of the people will actually go, "Oh well, I can't afford to do this anymore." It's like, well, that's probably because you've taken a lot of the profits out and actually spent it on yourself, and you're not actually left it in to reinvest. That's probably why you're exiting right now. It's not created by investing in perfect markets. I'll guarantee you that. It's created medium to long term, and it's created by understanding perfect ones better than everyone else. That's what the key is. You understand the market better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And if you're top 1% in anything, that's what you want to be knowledge-wise, top 1% in that field. And if you're top 1%, just like the top 1% athletes, the top 1% business people, they all make a fortune Second place, significantly less.
Mhm.
You want to be first every single time for that reason. And that's why you want to literally study a continuing master's degree in property investment.
Mhm. And people always think, you know, and people that are successful will probably get this question, like, how do you do that? You could learn to do anything. You just need to apply yourself and find the right, and find the right
That's
way.
another story. Creating habits for doing that. And we have done on that as well. So it is creating habits every single day on how to look at things, how to analyze things, and just build that momentum, and it's understand what to do. I mean, I'm just about to go into a Zoom with my daughter to actually show her how we value the properties in order to demonstrate to the bank that we could potentially buy with 100% lending.
Yep.
No money down.
That kind of learning, that's invaluable, because that could...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Right. Okay. That was rent controls, guys, and a lot more, obviously, as well. Thanks for joining, Jim, and sharing that with us. We will leave it here today, and we'll join you next time for the Wealth Creation Show.
Bye for now.
Thanks, Jim. Bye.